Good afternoon. For those of you who came from the south, you probably blew in. And those who came from the north, you'll have a little push as you head home this afternoon. So, welcome to another First Fridays. Very much looking forward to hearing Julia Largent in her presentation this afternoon, and Monica will share a bit about her, so I will not preempt her, but Julia has roots in Indiana and that other M college up that direction, but she has seen the light and chosen to come south. With that said, I'm going to turn it to Monica Rice. Glad to have you here this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you all for coming. I'm so pleased with this crowd size, and so I'm glad that you got some sunshine on your way over, and that we are all looking forward to hearing Julia's presentation. So Julia Largent came to the college last fall to begin teaching after finishing her PhD at Bowling Green University in Ohio, which overlaps with some of where I grew up. And like Steve said, she and I share both being Manchester graduates, I from Manchester College and Julia from Manchester University by that time. Oh, still college, all right. And so we will look forward to hearing her presentation from Nanook to Blackfish, taking a look at the history of documentaries. And I don't know a lot about the history of documentaries, so looking forward to hearing this. And just so you all know, when we spoke last night, Julia had about 100 slides ready to go, which she has reduced for this presentation. But if you have any questions about documentaries, she will probably be able to answer them. This is one of her specialties. So get some good questions ready in your head for the end of the presentation. And so with all of that, I thank you once again for coming, and we look forward to hearing from Dr. Largent.
Thanks, Monica. Thank you all for coming today. I want to thank Monica and the Cedars and the college for having me and inviting me to speak today. So I love documentaries. I've grown up with them. And so when I started my graduate work, I really wanted to dive into what exactly documentaries were and the history of them. And my advisor at the time is a historian of documentaries. So he kind of really pounded into me history. So of that comes now my love of documentary history, and I wanted to share it with you today. As Monica said, I have a lot of slides. I have narrowed it down, I promise, but there's still a lot, and I was very adventurous when I said I was going to cover over 100 years in 45 minutes. So I'm skipping a lot of sections of history, so if you really want to learn more, let me know, and I can get you some more information. So these are kind of really big points throughout the history. First off, where does documentary begin? It begins with the invention of film. So we're going to go a little bit backward before Nanook, which is in the title, to Thomas Edison, who had the Black Maria in West Orange, New Jersey. It was in 1893, so we're going back a while. Film production studio, it used the sun to record, and to kind of, the way that film is with the light, it uses the sun. The downside is you had to bring the world to the camera. It was a very stationary thing. You had to bring whatever you wanted to the Black Maria to get it recorded, which really limited it to really people. You couldn't go out and film nature. You had to bring it all in. And so it cost about $630 at the time, which is now $16,000 and some change. It is no longer there. However, there's a recreation, and this is what it looks like. I forget where this is. I think it's still in West Orange, New Jersey. And this is an example of the film that was created. As you can tell, there's no audio. It's just footage. And so this is in 1894. It's one of the first ones of a dancer. And you can tell the quality of it and just the footage itself and how it was done. About the same time, we have the Lumiere brothers, Louis and Auguste, who created what is called a cinematograph. I can never say it. And about 1894, so Edison was 93, this is 94, so it's really about the same time in different countries. The unique thing with this is a 3-in-1 camera. So it had the camera itself, the action of filming, the printing machine, and then they could project it all within the same device, which is really cool. And the cool thing about this is it was portable. So where Edison, you could only have, you brought the world to the camera, this you could bring the camera to the world. So you can tell which one kind of won out in the invention of cameras, because now they're in our phones. The lower image is kind of a picture of all three types. It's an illustration, it's drawn, but that's kind of what it looks like. It's known for two main pieces. One of them is workers leaving the Lumiere factory, and it was 1895, and then arrival of a train, and that was also in 1895. So this one is, it's on repeat, so it's going to keep going. But this is the workers leaving the Lumiere factory. It's a very, simple named. And then this one is arrival of a train. And this one is special because audience members were not used to film, and it's said that many audience members actually fled from the theater because they thought the train was going to come out at them. Put yourself in the shoes of people, first time ever seeing film or, moving image. It can be a little scary. There's a train coming at you. So that's always kind of what is known for this. By 1907, fiction was starting to overtake nonfiction. And this is part to Georges Méliès, who started to invent the special effects. You have the Man on the Moon, which if you're familiar, it gets referenced a lot. So it's a big moon, and there's like astronauts go up to it. And he was kind of the first to really invent special effects. So with the invention of special effects came this ability to have more fiction films and devices. And then also newsreels, weeklies, and semi-weekly productions became more prevalent, and documentaries themselves became less prevalent. However, that paved the road for Robert Flaherty. Robert Flaherty grew up in northern Michigan and Canada, and he started his career as an explorer. He wanted to explore Canada and northern Canada and the wilderness. From this also came the use of camera, and he would take cameras on his expeditions and film them. He became obsessed with the people of the area and the lifestyle. And over 1914-15, he captured, developed, and produced a film of his exploration. However, when he was editing, he dropped a cigarette on the film, and in came a fire. And all of the footage burned up. I really like my illustration. I get really happy every time I get to do this slide. But he didn't give up. He went back. And of this time, he actually had more of a goal in mind. He wanted to tell a story and not just show footage. So he was funded through a French company that I can't say because I don't know French. In 1920, and you can see how much and what it is now in comparison. And he created Nanook of the North, which is considered the first documentary. If you haven't seen it, I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. It's really easily accessible anymore. I have it on DVD. If you want to borrow it, let me know. But it has its own issues because it is scripted. They hired actors to become Nanook. Nanook is an Eskimo, and his family. The family is actually not related. They were all actors. But we'll get to that in a second. Filming has issues. The film was so cold near northern Canada, it shattered like glass. They had issues with developing it. It's transported dog hair-free water every day for developing the film. They had like the Huskies and whatnot. And they wrapped up filming in 1921. So then from this, they tried to sell it, and these are really small, I'm sorry. They tried to sell it to other companies, for them to show it. Finally, Pathé took it. So Columbia and Paramount and all of them passed over it, and Pathé took it. It premiered in 1922 in New York. Since then, it is all over pulp culture. If you're a fan of Frank Zappa, he has two songs, Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, which references Nanook, and then there's a follow-up song to it, Nanook Rubs It. There's an ice cream bar somewhere in Berlin, or at least was at one point, with Nanook on it, and that's that picture. It's all over children's TV shows, Nanook is the thing. So if you ever hear a reference to Nanook, it's a reference to this film. So you'll see it all over the place. After that, Flaherty, they wanted him to repeat the success that Nanook was. And he went to Samoa. However, it flopped because there was no extreme danger. It's warm there, yes, but there's not the extreme danger of cold. And they didn't have to survive in snow. Instead, they were surviving in heat. And there wasn't the same danger. So Moana, not the Disney film, the documentary, was released in 1926 to no success. However, this is important because at this point is when the term documentary was actually coined. So John Grierson, who I'll talk about in a couple slides, was the first to use the term documentary. It was used as an adjective to describe something and not as a noun as we know it today. And then it got retroactively named for Nanook. So even though Nanook was around for a couple of years, it wasn't until Moana that the term was actually starting to be used. And the definition of documentary at the very beginning is the creative treatment of actuality. 5 words, that's all it is. And this opens the door for a wide array of explaining what a documentary is and what fits into the category. So today we think of documentaries as truth, as footage of interviews or events happening. But under this definition, On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando could be considered a documentary. Even though the film itself is fictional, it's based on things that could actually have happened. So it's the creative treatment of actuality. So it's a lot more of a broad term than what we know today. So that's just a fun little fact. So this is John Grierson. If you're familiar with Boy Meets World, I think he looks like Mr. Feeney. I'm showing my youngness, I guess. So he is considered the father documentary, and this is the guy who used the term documentary to explain Moana. He's from Scotland, but he also has roots in the US. He came and worked over here. He struck up a friendship with Flaherty, even though they ended up going different ways with some things. From Grierson, we come into Roy Straker and Per Lawrence. And these are individuals who are part of a documentary film unit, a photography unit. And when we think of documentary, we specifically think of film, but any more photography can happen, radio documentaries, so podcasts, or This American Life could be considered a radio documentary, and those sort of things. And from this came The Plow That Broke the Plains. So it talks about the dust storm that happened, and then quite a few others. And also from this came one of the really famous pictures of the Depression era with the mother and her eyes is from this unit. I don't remember the name of that picture, I'm sorry. So they created a bunch of these films that just show the impact of living in the US on the human life. And Hollywood hated it because it was government-sponsored film and it wasn't Hollywood selling it. It wasn't Hollywood doing their thing to make money. It was the government trying to demonstrate, life of an American. It did end in 1940, so it wasn't that long, or it wasn't around very long, but we have some great things from that. And some of these are, The Plow That Broke the Plains is available. If you're interested in watching it, I can get you access to it. So from there, we also have The March of Time, which was a weekly radio series in 1931 to 1945. So this is where the radio documentary also comes in. 30 minutes, once a week on Friday nights, kind of explained what was happening in the world. It was adapted in 1935 to film, or to video, and then it was shown in theaters prior to films. And I don't have who quotes that, I'm sorry, but The March of Time is fakery and allegiance to the truth. It's kind of because it was reenacted. So at this point, we're starting to get away from being okay with reenaction within documentaries and really wanting that true, on the ground reactions to interviews and that sort of thing. So there you go. On the other side of the pond, we have Humphrey Jennings in Britain, who he worked under Grierson for a while. Eventually, he broke free to do his own thing. He was a surrealist painter, and he wanted to take the surrealism into film and off of just the canvas. From this, he started what's called the Mass Observation Organization, which really just meant that people were going out and filming British people. So it was founded in 1937. They were asking questions at the time. So, what impacts your life? You know, who do you love? That sort of thing. They had untrained volunteer observers. So really, you could sign up to be an observer, and you tracked what you saw each day, which to me is a little creepy, but kind of cool at the same time. And then it was helpful during the World War II because of some surveillance aspect of it. In the mid-1960s, was relaunched in 1981. It was occasionally influential in shaping British public policy, which I think is kind of interesting, and criticized the Ministry of Information's posters, which led to their being replaced with more appropriate ones during 1939. So these are some of the films that he's known for, and I have a short clip from one of the episodes of the mass observation stuff. So it's just in the middle of it. I just picked a random point. There's not much narration, it's really just the sound of Britain. Moving on to Alain Renard, and again, I'm not French, so I apologize if I say his name wrong, but he received a camera for his 12th birthday, and that's what kicked it off. And I don't know about you, if you have a hobby, at what point you started it, but getting something at a young age of that nature is what starts a lot of it, especially film. For a lot of people, they start young. I had a camera in my hand since I was really young, and I've continued doing camera-related things, so I'm not that different from that. However, he's made a name for himself within documentary, and I have not. So clearly he's doing something right. But like Jennings, he was interested in surrealism. He wanted to bring in a different viewpoint to documentary and wanted to tie in the surrealism to it. So he left my train of thought. He left for military service in 45, and returned to Paris in 46. Through this, he became really interested with the concentration camps and everything that happened during that time. And he directed a film called Night and Fog. And Night and Fog is a very sobering film to watch about concentration camps. And he uses modern day film at the time, modern day, it's not new now, but he splices together current film with archival footage of concentration camps. And I have a short clip here in a second. And he uses it to kind of, tell the story of it, but not through the way that you normally would. It is narrated in French by Jean Cairol, who is a survivor of the concentration camp that he explores. So here's a short clip from it. So this is the current footage.
Voilà le décor. Des bâtiments qui pourraient être écuries, granges, ateliers. Un terrain pauvre devenu terrain vague. Un ciel d'automne indifférent. Voilà tout ce qui nous reste pour imaginer cette nuit coupée d'appels, de contrôle de pouls. Nuit qui claque des dents. Il faut dormir vite. Réveil à la trique, on se bouscule, on cherche ses effets volés. 5 heures, rassemblement interminable sur l'Appelplatz. Les morts de la nuit faussent toujours les comptes. Un orchestre joue une marche d'opérette au départ pour la carrière, pour l'usine. Travail dans la neige qui devient vide de la boue glacée. Travail dans la chaleur d'août avec la soif et la dysenterie. Mille Espagnols sont morts pour construire cet escalier qui mène à la carrière de Mauthausen.
This one is also available on YouTube if you want. I think it's only about 30, 45 minutes, and it is really sobering to watch it. I think it's worth a watch for most people. There are some disturbing images, though, so I will throw that out there, I mean, based on the topic of the film. But I think it's really well done, and it's important to watch. So in the same era, we also have Frank Capra, who is known as an American film director, specifically for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, It Happened One Night, among many others. And he gets brought into the documentary world through his service during World War I and II. Instead of fighting on the lines, he was directed to direct films to try and get more American people to sign up to serve for their country during this time. So some of you might be familiar with the Why We Fight series, and that he is the person who directed these. And the series are basically, the quote, based on the assumption that servicemen would be more committed and able fighters if they knew about the events leading up to and reasons for U.S. participation in the war. So that was his goal through these series of films, to try and get people to understand why we were fighting and who we were fighting, and hope that more people will voluntarily go to war. He relied heavily on combat footage from other nations, not necessarily using their own footage, but also fictional footage, so staging, hiring people to say specific things, etc. It was compulsory for servicemen to watch all 7 of the films. And these 7 include Prelude to War, The Nazi Strike, Divide and Conquer, The Battle of Britain, The Battle of Russia, The Battle of China, and War Comes to America. As you can see, the first 3 covers 1918 to 1941, so it really sets up why we're going to war. The second 3 covers the efforts of U.S. allies before U.S. involvement, and then the last one kind of consolidates the first 3, but goes more in depth. So really, why are we going to war throughout the entire series? He made additional films to these original 7. Most people know The Negro Soldier, specifically aiming Black people to join the service. And this specific one, I show Negro Soldier to my class often, and it strikes up a very interesting conversation. The entire film is set in a church. The main person talking is the pastor or reverend of the church during his sermon. And he's talking about one of the local congregants in the war. And it's a kind of a dialogue between the mother who is reading a letter home from her son about basic training. And it's all positive things that is happening. And so, interestingly enough, Capra had some stereotypes that he was allowed to play into, and some stereotypes that he was not allowed to play into for the film itself. So it's a really interesting one to look at for how we were talking people into joining the war efforts through these films. Completely skipping over some years. Robert Drew, who was born in Toledo, Ohio, started a group in 1958 at Time Incorporated. He wanted to create films that could carry the candid photography that was often featured in life. So if you're ever familiar with, you ever heard the phrase cinema verite or direct cinema, Robert Drew and his followers became called Drew Associates, kind of were some of the pioneers of this. So direct cinema is the action of the camera following someone, and there's not necessarily narration, there's very little voiceover. It's mostly the story being told through the people on camera. There's not interviews, it's really just the camera following the people as they go through life. And he was one of the first groups to kind of do this. From Robert Drew comes Primary, and then there's a follow-up Crisis. They both focus on JFK. So Primary is on the primary of JFK, and then after he won, he appreciated the film that was made, and Crisis was created afterward during a crisis in the White House and kind of the following of JFK through that specific crisis. They're both fascinating to watch, and it gives you a really good sense of what was happening. They developed the wireless synchronizing sound system, which is really important for what the Drew Associates were doing with their film. They're following people, they're gonna then have to have sound of some time with no narration and no title screens. You have to tell the story somehow. Visual can go so far with telling the story, but really the audio is what they were really needing. So they developed this way to have the camera, and then they had audio as well being collected. And so from this also comes Richard Leacock, who teamed up with Drew and also Robert Flaherty. Flaherty continues making films throughout the 1940s, and they teamed up on different projects. Specifically with Flaherty, they kind of teamed up a lot. They created a film called Louisiana Story, which is about a boy and his raccoon. His pet raccoon. He has a pet raccoon. I want a pet raccoon. And the take of an oil industry in Louisiana in the deep south. And so it's really interesting. It is very Flaherty in the sense that, similar to Nanook, it is scripted, it is hired people, but the fact gets across of the impact that the oil industry has in southern Louisiana. Similar to the Drew Associates, though, Leacock's own stuff avoided narration. He wanted the story to be told through what was happening on screen, and he wanted his audience to kind of make and take their own interpretation away. He didn't want to tell them what to think, he wanted them to make their own decisions. Similar to that, we have the Maysles Brothers. One of them only died a handful of years ago, I forget which one it was. But Albert and David, they are brothers, their last names are Maysles, they're the Maysles Brothers. It's really easy to remember. They originally began with the Drew Associates, so you can see a lot of these kind of branched off from Robert Drew and his direct cinema. And the Maysles have taken that even further. Albert had a psychology background, kind of talked his brother David into joining him. One of them always manned the camera, the other the sound equipment, and I have a picture on the next slide for that. And they wanted to maintain the personality-centered film. So much like Leacock, they wanted the stories to be told through the people on screen. Most feature a lead character, so they're following a specific person around or a specific group of people to tell the story. They're known for Showman, Salesman, Gimme Shelter, Grey Gardens, as well as many other. Have any of you seen Grey Gardens? Okay, it is a very wacky film with very wacky characters. It features a mother-daughter duo who are cousins, cousin and aunt, I believe, of Jacqueline Kennedy, which is how the Maysles Brothers found them. It's a very interesting documentary. Salesman actually follows around Bible salesmen from door to door. And both of those have actually been parodied by a show called Documentary Now on IFC on TV. So if you like parody, I got you. But Grey Gardens is pretty funny in its own right, but also kind of sad. But they're really known for that. They're sometimes seen on screen just because of the context of direct cinema. The director's always in every shot, or not in every shot, but you can sometimes hear that questioning, like, why are you doing this, from one of the two brothers. Moving on from the Maysles, we have Jean Roush, who directed a film called Chronicle of a Summer. Chronicle of a Summer is in French, so if you know French, you can watch without subtitles. If you don't know French, you can watch it with subtitles, which is what I do. Chronicle of a Summer features basically an ongoing question to people, are you happy? And it's a group of maybe 10 or so people who are then answering that question. It comes from a sociology background, and really wanting to get to the matter of what makes someone happy and how are they happy. The end of the film actually features an audience of everyone in the film watching the film themselves. So it's kind of meta in that sense of it's a film within a film. And you get to their reactions to how they were portrayed on screen. So you can really see that sociology background coming into play into the film itself. And Chronicle of Summer was in 1961. Frederick Weissman is probably most known for Tittycut Follies or High School. Tittycut Follies was a film, I'll back up. So Weissman would leave cameras in wherever he wanted. He really was interested in organizations and how they worked. So he would set up a camera, say, in the corner of this room, and would just let it go and go and go and go, and then would make a story from the footage on it. He did this in as a state hospital or criminal hospital in Massachusetts, and was actually banned shortly after the creation, even though he had the permission from the hospital to set up cameras and make this film. After it being created, was banned by the state. It has been since lifted in 1991, and so you are able to actually watch it. There are some disturbing images of some of the inmates, and there's a scene where there's a feeding tube, and the inmate is not happy about it. So it is hard to watch at points, but it's also really interesting to see those viewpoints and to see Weissman's take on the footage. It's not quite found footage, but it's raw. It's very raw. And he kind of had this idea that if an organization takes tax money, citizens have a right to know where the money goes, hence the state penitentiary, how it is used, and what goes inside the organization. And so he really wanted to show where your tax dollars were going and how they were being used. He also, like I said, had a film about high school. It was very similar. That one was not banned, but it was very similar. Imelda De Antonio. So we're getting to the 1970s at this point, late 60s and 70s. And at this point, we were starting to pass the baton from the older filmmakers to newer filmmakers, and kind of passing on knowledge and passing on tips and ideas to carry on the documentary. And Imelda De Antonio is one of those people. He advanced sharply left-wing political views, and for that, he got some pushback from people. He uses compilations, so he does have his own footage, but he also uses footage from other people and compiles them into one story. At sometimes taking or rearranging edit or clips to make it into a different storyline. That's not what I want, but it's a word that came to my head. So a different take on the issue and kind of twisting people's words into something else, which is where some of that pushback came back. He's known for Point of Order and The Year of the Pig and Underground. And The Year of the Pig, if I remember right, is about Vietnam. And so at this point, we're also getting into more of the activists. There's a lot of anti-Vietnam or just Vietnam documentaries in general during this time, as well as some more activist films, including feminist documentaries. So the 1970s was really this heyday for them, and they've grown since. There are women filmmakers prior to this, including Robert Flaherty's own wife, Frances, but a lot of them get left out of the history. As you can tell, this is the first time I've really mentioned women in this entire presentation. And that's partially because of time crunch, but also partially because they just weren't treated the same way in history as the men were. We've heard that before. So at this point, we really are starting this resurgence of women trying to take over the film industry. Under the leadership of Kathleen Shannon, a studio called Studio D came into play, and they really catered to basically non-white men. So women, older individuals, younger folks, non-white individuals, they helped them all tell their story through documentary film. And so this is a really important time. And the title on the right is by Erland Weissman in 1975. During this time also, public access television began in 1972. And this offered a new space for documentaries to bloom. We were just talking beforehand how there's a documentary on PBS tonight that I'm probably gonna go home and watch. And so this really became a place that documentaries found their home. They found their audience that had access to it, and plus everyone has access to it in general. One of the first things that was used is a Paper Tiger Television put forth a series called Herb Schiller Reads the New York Times. And it's more than just him reading it. He is a media scholar from the West Coast, but he also kind of does some commentary on what's happening. And it's as close as you might get to something like Jon Stewart or The Daily Show that happens on TV today. So here's a quick clip from it.
The size,
this is the very first episode of it.
The New York Times as a media conglomerate. But you might also say, well, why just pick on the New York Times for an analysis, which we are going to be doing now and for the next several weeks? There are many other huge conglomerates. And the answer to that is yes, you could, just as maybe with great effect and illumination, look at the McGraw-Hill conglomerate, or you could be looking at Warner Amex or Westinghouse. But the New York Times occupies a very special place in American life and also in the life of the metropolitan New York area.
So I cut him off, but so he's justifying why he's using New York Times instead of something else. But you can tell most of the time this was taped and streamed live. So there is that little bit of audio that came in that you just power through it in live television. There's a ton of these available on YouTube. That's actually where this clip is from. So you can go back in time and hear about things that happened in the 1980s from Herb Schiller's point of view. And this is one of the first public access television shows. So you can see where we've come with public access. In 1986, brought the digital video recorder. Wow, this did a difference. The same way that the synchronization of sound that the Drew Associates brought along, the digital video recorder radically changed what we filmed and how we filmed. When we filmed, who we filmed, everything. It changed everything about documentary film. It was now easier for more people to afford a camera, but also use it in a smaller space. So the older cameras took up a lot of space. There were cables that ran, and digital video recorder helped a lot with this. At this time, also the editing software. No longer were you afraid to smoke in the editing room. You were able to do this digitally. Well, not smoke digitally, but sorry. Now you can smoke almost digitally in a weird way. But Avid was a software that's still used today. It was developed in 1987, and this really revolutionized how we were editing film. We weren't necessarily physically cutting the film. We were splicing it together in a digital software atmosphere. It took way less time to edit the film. You could recut things in different ways. And again, you didn't have to worry about it catching on fire. So that's always good. And Barbara Kopple was very prevalent still today, 1970s, and still making some films today. She's probably most known for Harlan County, USA, which is one of her first ones in 1976. Covers a coal miner strike in Harlan County, Kentucky. Thank you. I didn't write that down. I've seen it, but I forgot what state it was in. And really covers that strike from really the start to the end. And it's kind of eye-opening for non-coal life to kind of see that. And as they said, she's still making films, Gunfight in 2011, and I don't think that's her most recent. So she's still doing stuff. Which leads us to one of the very last sections that I have, animated, interactive, and virtual reality documentaries. We're still paving new directions for documentaries. Not included on this is the inclusion of documentary through video game, which goes a little bit with the VR or the interactive. So Waltz with Bashir, which is the screenshot here on the right, animation is always contested when it comes to documentary, as is any sort of reenactment. And Waltz with Bashir came out in 2008. Ari Fillman is the director, and he was a soldier in a war and it's based on him interviewing different people and trying to figure out what happened. He has a memory lapse, and he animates the interviews. To really bring it home, the last couple minutes of the film is really touching. It fades from animated into real life footage. And it's a scene of a bunch of dead bodies. And so it's really sobering to watch it. And it really brings home to the viewer that this is real. It's not animated. It is not a cartoon. Pine Point Revisited is an interactive or an iDoc. And this is a screenshot of it. It's a website. You go to the website, you are interacting with it. If you can tell on the left and the right, there's next and back buttons. And there's a little tiny arrow on the blue picture. That's my mouse cursor. And so you click around, you can go at your own pace. Some of them you're actually able to drag and drop things, some different documentaries. So it tells the story through a non-video, but through the use of interaction. And then lastly, Clouds Over Cedars is a virtual reality. It's about 8 minutes long, it's on YouTube. For those of you who have Facebook, you might be familiar with the 360 photos where you tilt your phone, or you can click and drag on a photo and it changes the viewpoint in the photo. That's what this is. It's virtual reality. So the entire film, it's a 360 picture, and you can kind of There's a narration, and you can kind of click and drag within it. So it's really cool, and it's free. So that's the nice thing about a lot of these. I like free. So to wrap it up, things to remember, like any other field, documentary filmmaking has been impacted by technology and social events. It's continuing to change. We're continuing discussion about the definition, even within documentary studies. In my field, no one can really agree on what is and what is not a documentary. It has grown and morphed as society grows and morphs. So as we do different things, so does film. It picks up on the nuances of human interactions and plays to them. So with the interaction and the VR, it picks up on what we like most about things and our nuances as humans and plays to those specifically. Lastly, it'll forever keep changing. The simple definition is much more expansive than any newer definition. So if you really just go back to the creative treatment of actuality, a lot of things fit into a documentary, but if you stick to one of the more newer ones, it's much more narrow. So it's up to you whether you classify On the Waterfront as a documentary or not. Are there any questions? And thank you. I can breathe now. Yeah.
Is Ken Burns a documentary?
I'm laughing because Monica and I have had this discussion several times.
Yeah, and let me repeat it through the microphone. He's asking if Ken Burns is a documentarian. Yeah.
Yes, he is. I like Ken Burns, but I also don't like him at the same time. He romanticizes a lot of history. Has nothing to do with his skills as a documentarian. He is a documentarian, but a lot of documentary scholars don't use his stuff for the fact that he romanticizes history, and it's not necessarily the truth. But if you go back to Grierson's basic definition, he is creatively telling something that actually happened. So yeah, he is. Yeah, Alan.
I don't know this even be considered documentaries, but one of the more influential things out of my youth were the old Lions travel logs. I mean, in our town, it was the Lions that sponsored going to these live presentations where people had gone and filmed things. Did you ever look at those? Do you know what happened? I assume they just vanished?
I don't know enough about that to really answer. I'm sorry. I can look into it though and let you know.
What's up this year? What's going to get the award? What's the big ones out there?
Forget what I voted for that. I've not seen most of them, to be honest. Icarus is one that's up. And if you're at all interested in doping practices of athletes, it's a really interesting film to watch.
What's it called?
Icarus, Icarus. Trying to remember what else is up.
See the Ebbing, Missouri one? Is that a documentary?
Oh, no, that's just, that is up for Best Picture, but that's completely fictional.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
What do you teach at the college?
I teach the communication, the media and journalism, and so I'm the advisor for the newspaper here, but I'm also teaching a pop culture course this semester where I'm going over with students and trying to get them to look at media in a less passive way and really looking deeper into what they're consuming. But overall, it's media and journalism courses.
Yes, in all this history of, I'm talking about Burns, where does PBS, the independent lens fit? Is it a documentary? Is it a what?
Yeah, so Independent Lens and Frontline have similar backgrounds where their different filmmakers come in and do different things. I actually used Frontline for part of my dissertation, and so both of them are both very great series. And they work a little bit differently. I don't know as much about Independent Lens as I do Frontline, but I think they work. And one of the things to remember whenever you watch something that you would consider a documentary, and this is my goal in life, is to get everyone to believe this. Documentaries are still storytelling. They're still told through the director's eyes, so they can be try and be as unbiased as they want and can be. But there's still going to be a specific story told. And so not every documentary, because it's labeled a documentary, is going to be 100% accurate. So it really goes back to the fact-checking of things and not passively watching the film, but also checking everything out on it. And I get into it too, where I saw it on a documentary. I saw this last night. I can't believe this is happening. And it's really easy to get wrapped up in it. But I think Independent Lens is great. PBS, most of their stuff is pretty great in general too. And I'm trying to think. I think it's Independent Lens and not POV that has one about Stranger with a Movie Camera. And it's really fascinating, and it talks about when an outside filmmaker comes into a community to make a documentary, the impact on the community itself. And it's told by a documentarian who's from that town that it happens. So if you're really interested in that play between the filmmaker and the community, it's a really fascinating one.
Yeah. In your field, are there a couple that people say, okay, this one changed the world?
I mean, Nanook. I mean, because it's the original. And there are a few others, and they're not popping in my head right now. I mean, I included Blackfish in my title, even though I didn't really talk about it. Blackfish came out in 2012. It's about SeaWorld and the killer whales. It's one of the first ones post-social media that really hit really, really hard. And it actually prompted SeaWorld to change some of their regulations with killer whales and how they're treated in captivity. And so in the sense of that one really kind of pinpointed the power that social media can use in documentaries. That one's really influential. But I think it really depends on the scholar themselves and what they look at. But Nanook is definitely among them.
Any other questions for Julia? All right, well, join me in thanking Julia.
Thanks, guys.
And we all have things to add to our movie and television watching lists now from